Fun. So this is a pop-off valve doing its job, which is a pressure relief valve, meaning if the pressure inside of a propane tank gets too high, there's a little valve in there. It's spring-loaded. It's like a pressure valve on a compressor or anything else. It doesn't sense the pressure. The spring compresses, and at a certain point, you're gonna see the contents of whatever is inside the pressurized system releasing quickly. And in this case, it's propane, and stuff happens when the temperature gets really cold and it frosts over like that. On these smaller tanks, like 40 pounds or less, there's an overfill protection device put into them, and they are filled. They're supposed to be filled at only 80% of their working pressure because they need a little bit of headspace for vaporization in case the temperature increases. That's also why they're painted a light color, because the liquid propane inside of it it needs room to expand. It also needs a little bit of room to vaporize for when it goes through the tube as a gas rather than a liquid. Caption in that original video from my TikTok buddy Weld Supply, it says that the OPD, the overfill protection valve, failed, which is probably the case unless it was just filled by someone who knew how to circumvent it and they wanted to fill the cylinder completely full, and by law you're not supposed to do that. You can tell if your cylinder has an OPD by looking at the handle. It doesn't look like a star. The older ones actually looked kind of like a water, like a water valve, gate valve. It had a star, more grabbies on it. These are 3-pointed, and if you look closely, it says OPD on it. The OPD is also actually part of the gauge on the tank. Hope I can draw this in a way that makes sense and is more clarifying than confusing. It's also worth mentioning that the overfill protection device does not help the propane be safer as it comes out. It's only so that the tank doesn't become overpressurized. If you start screwing with the tank afterward, the out hole, it's only the in hole part. As the propane comes out, we have another safety device. The OPD works as a float valve. Oh my God, this is gonna be terrible. All right. As always, somebody in the industry correct me or like say it better if you know how to say this better. If I could unscrew this and pull this thing out of here, you would see a little float in here, like in the back of your toilet. If you lift off the back of your toilet tank, there's that little ball that floats up with the liquid, and that's what shuts off the water coming in again. And sometimes you can adjust that by bending the rod if you still have a steel rod connecting the floaty part to the valvey part. We also have float valves in our gas tanks in our cars, and that's hooked up to a sensor for the computer, I'm pretty sure, and that's what tells you whether you have gas or not. And also in carburetors, there's a little float into the fuel bowl that tells the car when to add more fuel into it. It's a little needle valve. I barely know what I'm talking about. Inside of this thing is a little float, and as this thing is filling up, the little float rises. And there are magnets inside. There's a little float inside, and as the float goes up with the increase in volume of the tank, it pulls down on this, which has a magnet, and then there's another magnet inside of the gauge, and that's what actually physically pulls the gauge one way or another. These things aren't always accurate, but that's how they work. The best way to tell how much is left in your tank is to weigh it. If you've got a 20-pound tank, well, you can't use all of the fuel out of a tank, so you're never gonna get a zero. These tanks also have on them, usually on the handle, a little tare weight. If you want to find out how much propane is in here, you would weigh the tank empty, and then you would weigh it full again. You subtract the little number from the big number, and now you have how much was added, and you just kind of keep track of that. That's the only surefire way to know. And it will say somewhere here, TW, tare weight. It'll say what the tare weight is on the tank sometimes. 20-pound tank that holds just over 5.5 gallons, which will burn for 7 hours, again, depending on the temperature. Also come equipped with a safety valve that's really cool, and it actually senses a drop in, it senses a massive increase in draw. So imagine, okay. First of all, these are designed not to allow a draw unless there is something hooked up to it. So there have been people who will be like, man, this thing feels really full, but when I open it up, I don't hear anything coming out of it. It's because they're designed not to open up unless there is actually an accessory attached to it. Unlike the cylinders I have in here, if I crack my oxygen, my argon, my acetylene, they're gonna let something out. And that's usually what I do. I don't know where I got that habit from, but I do it to blow anything out of the threads. I just learned it somewhere. This won't do that. Additionally, you can trip the safety valve. There's a flow limiting valve in here that can sense when there is an excess of draw on it, like in the case of a leak, or if you were to cut the hose in half, or sometimes even if you've left your grill on, for some reason there's a draw already happening and you try to turn it on, you can trip that safety valve, and it'll only allow apart like 30% of the usual flow, and you have to reset it by closing it, fixing the leak, or turning your thing off so that there's no draw, and then turning it back on. I would crack it and then kind of slowly open it up so it's not a fast draw. And you can always try disconnecting it, reconnecting it. I also open my flammable things only a partial turn so that if anything should happen, you can just reach over it and close it right up without, having to crank down on it. Unlike oxygen cylinders, which are a double seating valve that you should open all the way up to get a good full seal on it so that you're not losing any gas from your tank. You can just crack these. I think you can also accidentally trip those safety valves by tipping your tanks over. For a welder, I don't know as much about this as I should. This was kind of a fun opportunity, and that was a really cool video to show how those overfill protection devices work, or should work. How that safety blow-off valve did work, and it might explain to somebody why their gas isn't coming out of their grill very well. Like sometimes if your flame is very low and it just seems like you've got like no oomph coming out of your tank when you know it's full, you may have tripped that safety valve somehow, and it just means close up your tank, make sure your grill is off, make sure your fire pit, whatever it is that you're trying to run off this propane is off. There's no leak, there's no sink anywhere, excess being run, and maybe even disconnect the hose and reconnect it again, and then try again and open it slowly. I saw that happen on a forklift once. I'm not quite sure how it worked, but I knew a guy who managed to accidentally hook up like a gas propane regulator to a liquid propane tank off the back of a forklift, and he froze the regulator, and we were all really disappointed because we were gonna deep fry a turkey with it that day out in the back of the shop. I wasn't there. I'm pretty sure that's what happened. Can somebody explain if that's feasible? Is that a thing that happens? Propane.